Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Wood. I am the Executive Director and CEO of the Ohio History Connection, and I just want to take a moment to welcome you to the Ohio History Center and our exceptional example of brutalist architecture and our ample parking, so welcome. This building opened in 1970, and it'll soon be on the National Register of Historic Places, so you can take that in. Buildings built in the 70s are now historic, so welcome, yes. Our mission at the Ohio History Connection is to spark discovery of Ohio stories, to embrace the present, share the past, and transform the future. And we do that here at our facility, but we also have 58 sites around the state, and we're really excited that soon we will have Ohio's first World Heritage Site, so joining places like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids, and that will be at 3 locations around the state: in Newark, in Chillicothe, and then also in Warren County with the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. We have a whole exhibit about it that you can visit, but we're just so excited of all the growth that's happening in business and economics. Also in our field, we're seeing that the world will be looking at Ohio because of the significant history that we have here for thousands of years. So welcome to our space. If you haven't been here before, we're so glad you're here. And if you've been here before, welcome back. We love having you. So now I'd like to introduce Don DePero, who is the President and CEO of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and congratulations to the Ohio History Connection for that wonderful designation. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the Columbus Chamber of Commerce's CEO Insights series. We're thrilled to welcome all of you here today at the Ohio History Connection, and thanks so very much for joining us. A special thank you to our 2023 CEO Insights partners. We appreciate your continued support of these phenomenal conversations. You'll hear more about them in a few minutes. And to begin this morning's program, I'd like to introduce Keith Martinez, one of our partners, and he is the Columbus office managing partner with Plante Moran. Keith.
Good morning, and welcome to the Columbus Chamber of Commerce CEO Insights series. I'm Keith Martinez, Managing Partner of the Columbus office at Plante Moran, longstanding partner of the CEO Insights series. The firm is a full-service CPA and business advisory firm. Locally, we're providing assurance, tax, wealth management, and other consulting services. Busy season is upon us, and with our first major deadline of February 15th behind us, we're focused on work that is now due in March and April, so a lot happening downtown. As for today's program, the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, I think of Zoombezi Bay, I think of the Wilds. They've all provided such wonderful memories for so many of us, so many of my friends and family, and we're really fortunate to have these treasures in our community. We're excited to welcome Tom Schmid, the current President and CEO of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, to our stage at Ohio History Connection. And just a few reminders before we start the program. We will pick 10 random registrants from today's program to present Crimson Cup coffee and tea gift cards. So thank you to Greg and his team at Crimson Cup for this generous gift. Be sure to stick around for our closing comments from Bill Nolan this morning as he will announce today's winners. I'd now like to welcome Don back to the stage on behalf of First Merchants Bank to introduce Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. I'm pleased to be speaking this morning on behalf of our friends and supporters at First Merchant Banks. First Merchants is a sponsor of our CEO Insights series since our program's inception. Firmly rooted in the Midwest, First Merchants Bank is proud to put the needs of their customers and communities first. Our welcoming bankers provide customers with dependable, individually tailored financial strategies, and they offer attentive service driven by their helping you prosper mentality. This means First Merchants believes in equipping their diverse communities with the knowledgeable financial services, education, and tools they need to succeed. Their attentiveness to customer needs is one reason they've been named a Forbes and Newsweek Best Bank. First Merchants isn't just your local community bank, they are your community. Thank you to First Merchants. Absolutely. So over the years here at CEO Insights, we've had the honor of hearing many unique and inspiring stories from leaders throughout our community. And that continues today with our special guest, Tom Schmid. Tom is the president and CEO of the Columbus Zoo family of parks, which in addition to our zoo includes Zoombezi Bay Water Park, the Safari Golf Club, and the Wilds. The Wilds is a 10,000-acre wildlife conservation center located in Muskingum County. With a team of 350 full-time and more than 2,000 part-time staff, Tom and his teams inspire people by connecting them with wildlife. Prior to his appointment here in Columbus, Tom served as the president and CEO of the Texas State Aquarium, a wildlife conservation and marine education institution, and the most visited cultural attraction in South Texas. Tom was born in Miami, Florida in 1962. He grew up in South Florida and received his bachelor's degree in biology from Stetson University and his master's of science in biological sciences from the University of Central Florida. Tom began his career at SeaWorld in Orlando, and prior to going to the Texas Aquarium, he served as the director of operations for Nauticus. Nauticus is the National Maritime Center located in Norfolk, Virginia. Tom and his wife, Karen, have 2 children, Max and Alexandra. You also know, of course, our Colleen Marshall, our Columbus region's preeminent broadcast journalist. Colleen anchors several daily newscasts at NBC4. We greatly appreciate Colleen's volunteer efforts on behalf of our Columbus Chamber. So please join me now in welcoming Colleen Marshall and Tom Schmid.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and start with the uncomfortable questions, because that's the way I like to roll.
Let's get them out of the way. Can you all hear me okay? I want to make sure our mics are working good. Great, thanks.
So I have to ask you first about the accreditation.
Yep.
We all know that that was what made news last year, and we all know why. So first of all, you show up because of essentially this crisis. So tell me what it's been like to walk through that, and how close is the zoo to regaining that all-important accreditation?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, it was an interesting situation to step into. So, as a lot of our zoo colleagues around the country, you know, we saw what was happening in the national media, and the Columbus Zoo is, as much as it is a renowned zoo in this community, but it's a renowned zoo across the United States. And so we were dismayed by what happened, and just frustrated, but like a lot of us, we just went on and did our day jobs. And when I first heard from a recruiter that summer, I started diving into it a little bit more deeply. So we had an accreditation inspection in the summer of 2021, and the zoo is actually at that time meeting almost every standard. But I think because of the financial misappropriation of the leaders and some of the disposition policies that weren't being followed, that resulted in the loss of our accreditation. So we've worked hard over the last 18 months, and we had our inspection most recently in December of last year, and it was a great inspection. The team did a remarkable job. We had no major concerns. We had 6 or 7 minor concerns, and those are generally things like additional barrier in front of an exhibit, or you know, some paint peeling on a wall, things like that. So one of the most remarkable things was when we had the inspection that resulted in our loss, our animal acquisition and disposition policy was considered a major problem for us. I mean, we were not moving animals in and out correctly. When they came and inspected us last month, it was actually a point of achievement. So in 18 months, our animal care programming team has really turned that program around. So I am 99.9% confident that in March, next month, we'll actually get our accreditation back, which will be good timing because we're actually hosting the annual AZA conference in Columbus in September of this year. So we're excited about that.
You know, this fell into your lap. I mean, they did recruit you, and you knew when you were coming here. You were coming into a zoo that, for the first time really in its history, was in crisis.
Yeah.
Because it is viewed as such an iconic institution here in Central Ohio. Everybody loves the zoo.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you are in charge. And as I mentioned to you backstage, one of my best friends is a graphic artist at the zoo. And I remember talking to him at that time, and morale for him was just horrible, because the people who work at the zoo don't go there to get rich.
Yeah.
The people who work at the zoo love animals, love the zoo. So how did you come in as the CEO and not only get the public to trust the zoo again, but get the people who work there to have pride in the institution again?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it was. I mean, if you think about what we went through, what the world went through post-COVID and during COVID, and that was, I think, traumatic enough for a lot of folks. But then imagine, finding out that the leaders of your institution, this is after, the organization laid off, 20, 30, 40 people. You find that the leaders were grifting, were essentially stealing from the organization. So that, I think, really compounded the trauma that the staff went through. And so what I did really during my first 90 days was just a lot of listening and a lot of learning. So we have 33 different departments, both at the zoo and at the water park and the wilds and the golf course. And I sat down with each department individually and spent time with them to really understand what their concerns were, to allow them to ask me questions, really just to get to know those teams. And it was, I think it was cathartic. I remember after one of the sessions, someone came up to me and she just thanked me. And she said, I've worked here for 7 years and I've never talked to the CEO. So it was just listening to staff and really making sure they understood that they had a voice in the organization. So I think that began to I think, change the culture, and then doing it in the community as well. So I think I met with probably 100 leaders during the first kind of 6 months here, and trying to get their understanding of how they viewed the zoo, how was the brand integrity of the zoo, how was it viewed in the community. And I think for the most part, I think folks were able to separate. You had 4 guys that were doing some pretty bad things, and they're gone now. But you had this fundamentally sound organization, and by the way, that was then being led by 4 extraordinary women that really stepped up, our senior VPs, and carried the torch and really moved that institution forward. So when I got here in December of 2021, there was actually a lot of work that had already taken place. So they really created a good, solid foundation for me to step into.
You have to worry, though, about transparency going forward, because people are going to be very carefully watching, especially when that levy comes back up again for renewal. So how much of the transparency and guarding against that kind of impropriety is in your lap, and how much of it is the board? And do you keep an eye on each other?
Well, we do. In fact, Brent Jackson is here from Fifth Third Bank. So Brent actually chairs our audit committee, and that committee has done a lot of heavy lifting over the last 18 months. We probably have 30 or 40 new financial policies that have been put in place subsequent to what happened, and they run the gamut from new auditing firms to new procedures to new ways to account for my expenses. So the chairman of our board, as well as the executive committee, has to approve a $10 parking reimbursement that I submit. I mean, we're getting down to that level, and I think the pendulum, I think, was way out here. Now it's way out here, and that's okay. I understand that I'm probably going to be the most scrutinized zoo CEO in the country for a while, but I welcome that, because I think that's what it's going to take to restore that trust. So I think we've made great progress. We're going to continue on this journey of transparency. We'll be posting meeting minutes on our website. Our 990 is already on our website. So and just sharing more with our teams about how budgets are developed and how resources are allocated. They're getting much more information now about actually how the zoo and all of our parks run than they ever did.
all of this happened at the same time there was another unwelcome national spotlight on the zoo. In the film that came out that indicated that zoo officials around the country, and specifically Jack Hanna, were taking these exotic cats from those backyard breeders and passing them off as if they were coming from zoos. You know, to those of us who know and love Jack Hanna, this was such a shock and such a black eye for somebody who really saved that zoo.
Sure.
So how were you also dealing with that, the reputation hit that the zoo took because of that?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, you know, so that was one of the two biggest issues for our accreditation loss, was our acquisition and disposition policy. There were a number of snow leopards that were used in programming that were that didn't come from the zoo. As you mentioned, came from a facility that we would not do business with today. And so all those policies and procedures have been changed. Our animal programming staff actually used to report to the CFO, which is very unorthodox. I can't think of another zoo in the country where you have your animal outreach teams reporting to the CFO. Doesn't make sense, right? But when we look at it in hindsight, it was a way that they could get around some of those disposition policies that our animal care teams at the zoo were always following. So that's been rectified, you know, and I struggle with this a little bit because, you know, I watched the conservation game obviously before I took the position here, and you know the camera guy was talking to Jack Hanna and asked about the animals, and Jack, I actually think he believed that they probably came from the zoo. I think Jack made the same mistake I think that our board of trustees made. They trusted leadership, but they didn't really question it, and I think that's an important distinction. My guess is that, you know, especially toward the end of Jack's career, you know, he was just told, look, Jack, you need to be here for this TV shoot. We're going to bring the animals, and it's all good. And that's the way things were always, you know, under Jack's understanding. That's the way things always operated. The animals came from the zoo. I'm not sure he really knew where they came from.
And it's not something we can ask him about now,
No,
obviously.
unfortunately, yeah.
Well, let's talk about happier things. One of the things that I think we can all agree, and it's certainly anybody who's been in this community for any length of time, is the enormous growth we've seen at that zoo.
Yeah.
When Jack got there, and I've talked to him about this many times, it was concrete cages. Paint, not only was paint peeling, there was no paint.
Yeah.
He was out there on the weekends painting bathrooms because the zoo was in such bad shape. You did come from another part of the country, and it is remarkable, isn't it, the reputation that the zoo has now for being kind of not only iconic for conservation, but just how great looking that zoo is. Tell us about the presentation of the zoo and how it compares to other facilities you've been at around the country.
Well, it is, and you know, it's a remarkable institution, and I think the success really for where we've gotten today is so many staff, so many folks marching in the right direction, and I think what, you know, Jack started and then what Jerry Bourne continued, innovative exhibit design, acquiring additional land, really put us in a strong position to be able to create, I think, which is one of the best zoos in North America. So the North America, or the African savanna habitat, I think, I've been to hundreds of zoos all over the world. It is one of the best savanna habitats of any zoo on earth. And I think in many respects, it's the future of what zoos are trying to do. So large, expansive habitats, natural substrates, mixed taxa, mixed species, all sort of living together in that habitat. It's a remarkable attraction. The polar bear exhibit, we actually won an AZA exhibit award the year that opened. And then most recently, our pinniped habitat, where our sea lions and seals are, one of the finest in the country. So the zoo has had a reputation for really innovative design, innovative habitats, and just remarkable places for animals to live. The caveat, and I will share with you and everyone in the room, is we've not always done as good of a job focusing on the indoor habitats or the wintertime habitats, where the animals, particularly our tropical animals, spend many months indoors. So those are areas where there's still a lot of opportunity for us to improve, and we're actually in process on some of those programs now.
What expansion are you planning? When we were talking backstage, you said there's something big coming. Can you tell us what it is?
We actually, over the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to invest about $50 million in the zoo and the wild. So at the wilds, we just broke ground on it's about a $7 million Camp Hellbender. So it's a new RV campground. If you all have been out there before, you know there's a lot to see, there's a lot to do. It's almost challenging to do that in one day. So we have some cabins, we have some yurts, but they're relatively inexpensive because there's a limited number available. So bringing an RV campground in there, folks can bring their RV in, they can do primitive camping. It'll be a much more affordable option for folks to spend a day or two at the wild. So that's a big project. At the zoo, the largest project that we're working on now is actually a complete redevelopment of our North America region. So North America, the oldest part of the zoo, Mexican gray wolf, black bear, river otters, Canadian lynx. So that's going to be completely transformed into new modern exhibits for all those animals and many more. We'll actually have an indoor restaurant for the first time in that part of the zoo, which will be nice for the winter time. So that's a big project. And then sort of behind the scenes, as I mentioned, our need to focus on the indoor habitat. So where we have bonobos today during the wintertime is the same place we had pandas 30 years ago. So concrete floor, children's gym equipment. I mean, it's a very, very outdated habitat for these amazing, extraordinary animals. So we're actually going to be completely rebuilding and expanding that space. That's about a $4 million project. We'll start construction on that in the spring, and I'm excited. That's the first in a whole series of improvements we're going to do for some of our indoor habitats. So those are kind of some of the bigger projects, but we just started development of our new 2040 framework. So that's going to be the new master plan that will guide growth in all of our parks over the next 10 to 15 years. Just starting that process, but by the end of this year, we'll be able to share more publicly what sort of the Columbus Zoo 3.0, so to speak, looks like.
When I think about the zoo, it's the logistics that fascinate me. You have all these species of animals, and I don't think we have an appreciation of what it's like to try to feed and care for those animals every day. Just how much, what's it like trying to get all of the right food to the right places, to the right animals in a single day? I mean, even the lettuce for the manatees is a project, right?
Yeah, I tell people sometimes it's really not a zoo, it's a small city. I mean, if you think about what we have out there and all the different departments and the different things that they do to care for the animals, to make sure our guests are happy, to make sure everyone's safe, it is an interesting logistic challenge. So we have a full-time team of folks that manage our commissary, which is where all the food is produced, and they work long days. They provide diets for every kind of animal at the zoo. Browse, so branches and leaves for a lot of our herbivorous animals. That's a constant challenge to get enough of that coming in. So we actually partner with AEP. AEP is a great partner. They do a lot of tree trimming around Columbus, as you can imagine. So many of those leaves and branches actually end up at the zoo, and we use those as browse for some of our animals. We also work with the Stratford Environmental Center in Powell to get vegetation from their farm and bring that into the zoo. So yeah, it is a huge logistic challenge. We haven't figured out a way to grow romaine lettuce yet for the manatees. That would be a huge advantage, because as you're right, we do go through a lot of romaine lettuce.
Yeah, I've been out there when they were feeding the manatees, and it's really a remarkable.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you came from an aquarium.
Yeah.
Which is a lot different than the kind of zoo that we have here. What surprised you the most when you got here about operating a zoo?
Yeah, our aquarium, we had obviously a lot of fish, but we had different small mammals and birds and things like that. But we had none of the large mammals like elephants and rhinoceros and giraffe. And so, understanding the complexity of caring for those animals, we have a CT scan here. There's not many zoos in the country. We didn't have one in Texas. Actually, they're bringing one in now, but having that medical diagnostic equipment for these animals, that's been real eye-opening. I think one interesting and maybe a little tough to understand is the attachment that our team has to these mammals and birds and all the animals. And as much as folks that work for aquariums, they love the sharks and the moray eels and the fish, it's just not the same as if you have a mammal. And anyone that has a dog or a cat knows this. And I tell people, imagine you spend 8 to 10 hours a day with your dog at all times. That's what some of our keepers do. And so when there's a loss, it is such a traumatic experience for that team. They may have cared for this animal for their entire career. And that was tough to see, the impact that has on the staff.
If I remember correctly, it was on Zoofari Day last year that an elephant died.
Yeah, Biko, yeah.
And I was with my friend who works at the zoo, and we were talking to this guy, and he was, visibly upset, and he had sunglasses on. And
that was Adam Felt, our senior curator.
Yeah, and my friend said to me, he's wearing sunglasses because he's been crying all day. So they get so emotionally, as you said, attached to these animals that the loss, the public hears about it and we think, oh, that's terrible, an elephant died. But this is like, I hate to say pet, but they get
more. It's
an
almost a family
attachment,
member.
don't they?
Yeah, they do, yeah.
So as we look at the zoo and its reputation for the city, do you ever contemplate your relationship with the general public here? You do rely on taxpayer funds, but how are you trying to push that message out that this zoo is a jewel for Central Ohio?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think community outreach is really a big part of my job, and so as much as we're nationally known, we are the Columbus Zoo, and we do get support from Franklin County voters, and so making sure that the zoo is accessible for everyone is paramount. And so we used to accomplish that by having free days where on Martin Luther King or President's Day we would open up the gates for free, and sometimes we would have 40 or 50,000 people show up, and it was not a great experience. So we really taken a much more strategic look at how we make sure that we're accessible to everyone in the community. So things like working with the community houses, St. Stephen's Community House or Rab Street, and providing them tickets that they can distribute to folks that frequent those areas. Working with the library, the Columbus Metropolitan Library System, so folks can now go to the library and just the same as when they would check out a book, they can check out a pass to come to the library or come to the zoo. Our family access program, so anyone that has a WIC card, they can get a 75% discount on a family membership. So I think those are all ways that we're making sure that we're accessible to everyone in the community, that the community understands it is their zoo, and we want them to continue to visit and be proud of it, and it becomes a resource for them and their family.
People sometimes are critical of zoos. Animal rights activists sometimes say, it's not right putting animals in a cage, that you should just, have conservation programs and protect them in the wild. What do you say to those critics?
Well, to some of them, I say there's a lot of agreement. I agree with a lot of what they're saying. The vast majority of animals belong out in the wild, and that's what we work to try to do every day, is to protect those habitats and restore those populations. But having a tiny fraction of those animals in human care under the best circumstances can be enormously impactful in terms of behavior change and conservation awareness and even funding conservation support. So I think as long as we make the commitment that well-being, animal well-being will be first and foremost in everything we do, we're going to do everything we can to make sure these animals are not just being cared for and not just getting the right animal health, but their well-being is measured and monitored. And we do that on a daily basis now to all of our animals at the zoo. Then I think that's our moral license to be able to do what we do. And if we can't demonstrate that, if we can't convince the general public that animal, in fact, is happy at our zoo, then we shouldn't have that animal.
Do you keep the animals happy? How do you keep animals happy in that environment?
So, and it depends on the taxa. So a lot of it has to do with enrichment activities that we do. So beyond just feeding the animal, beyond just making sure they have the right temperature and humidity in their habitats, giving them different things to interact with. We talked a little bit about browse. So all the different elements that we can bring in to keep them engaged. The bonobos, we have these rock formations that we put honey inside, and they have sticks that they can stick in there to get the honey out, just like they would do out in the wild. So all those things are really important. I think the interaction with the staff, with the keepers, we know that the amount of time they're able to spend with the animals will increase their animal well-being. And so we measure that, and that's a huge impact to how the animals are feeling at the zoo. So it's a multitude of things that go beyond just normal care and feeding that assure that they have a high level of animal well-being.
I did a story about a year ago about the computer program for the bonobos.
Yep.
Tell people how that works. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so actually for the bonobo and the orangutan. So in fact, I've seen it. I don't actually know how it operates, but my understanding is that they can use the touchscreen to get different treats and things like that. So that's another great example of some of the, using technology as an enrichment to improve their well-being.
Yeah, when they turn the slide on, if I'm trying to remember how it works, but they know now that it's activated, and if they hit a certain buzzer, then a treat comes out, and they have to solve like a puzzle, and then a treat comes out. And I remember standing there, and this one was really good at it, and he would do it very quickly. And then another animal would stand behind him and run over and steal the treat from him. So I thought, wow, they learned how to thievery too. They really are learning to be social animals.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
The zoo is involved with conservation.
Yeah.
So tell us what Columbus has done, what this zoo has done for really conservation around the world.
Yeah, so we if you think about our wildlife conservation program, and it fairly broadly, so we have sort of a regional focus. We've done a lot of work with hellbenders. So one of the largest and most interesting amphibians that you'll see in a river in Ohio, we have at our zoo bred these animals and released over 700 hellbenders. They're a threatened species into rivers all over Ohio, burying beetle, Massasauga snake. So there's a lot of local conservation work that we focus on because our staff has that expertise. We also work with other partners around the country on conservation programs. Our wildlife rescue program with the manatees, as you had mentioned, there's only a handful of facilities that have the capacity and capability to care for manatees. Manatees are under threat. They're a threatened species. And so we were one of the first partners to bring animals, bring orphan calves into the zoo, grow them up for a few years, and then release them back into the waters of Florida. So the wildlife rescue component is important. And then a lot of the work we do overseas in Africa and in Asia to support conservation projects, to support species, but even to support communities. We've been, our partners in conservation program in Rwanda, we know that if you want to save a species, you have to focus on the indigenous population as well. You can't just focus on the animals. And in many cases, you have these populations that they're illegally trading wildlife because that's the only way they can sustain their family. So if we can give them opportunities to generate money for their family, and we do a lot of that through PIC, where they create crafts, merchandise, things like that we actually sell here at the zoo and at Zoofari, which you've attended. We help people understand there are other ways they can make a living so they don't have to kill wild animals. That's one of many ways that we try to support the communities there. We've supported schools in Rwanda. We've supported hospitals. We want to strengthen the community so that they can help us strengthen the animal populations there.
You have to, as the CEO at the zoo, you have to be a business person, you have to be a marketer, you have to have knowledge about animals. So tell me a little bit about your background. I mean, how did you end up where you are now? I know you were born in Miami, but tell me about your education and how you ended up, the path that brought you to Columbus.
So yeah, I was born in Miami and grew up in South Florida and spent really most of my childhood in the water, under the water, over the water, fishing, diving, snorkeling, all those kinds of things. And so as I went to college, marine biology seemed to be the perfect choice. I was really interested in the marine environment and in particular sharks. And so went to graduate school, studied bioenergetics and sharks and rays. And I was about to, so my career path was to go get a PhD, be a professor, and do research, and that was it. And so I'd gotten a call from the team at SeaWorld. They were looking for someone to help manage their shark collection. This was right after I'd finished with my master's. And so I thought, well, this might be a kind of a fun diversion for a year or two. I'll do this, and then I'll go back and get my doctorate. And I ended up staying there for 6 years, so it was a really interesting experience. I got to actually visit the SeaWorld park and work the park in Ohio, helped open the SeaWorld Texas park, and then did some work in San Diego. So it I think opened my eyes to, you can do science and research, but public education and engagement is critically important if you want to save species. And so I learned more about managing attractions, and did a short stint at the National Maritime Center in Norfolk, Virginia, but then was recruited to go to Texas to be the director of animal husbandry at the aquarium, and then became chief operating officer and CEO. And so, it was sort of happenstance. And I never thought that I would run a zoo, but here I am. So it's been an interesting journey.
So the aquarium in Texas, it grew as well under your leadership.
Yeah.
Tell us about what it started at and where it was by the time you left. And I think it's still growing under some of the programs you started
It is, yeah.
there.
So when I started, we were probably one of the smallest aquariums in the country. It was regionally focused, and now it's the 7th largest aquarium in North America. So we raised about $100 million to build and grow that facility over the 20 years that I was there. And in fact, I'll be there next week. They're going to be opening, it's a new $20 million Center for Wildlife Rescue at the Texas State Aquarium. So that was the last project I had a chance to work on before I left. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that experience. But I had pretty much accomplished everything that I really wanted to do, so it was sort of interesting timing when I first got the call about Columbus, and I knew, you guys can do the math. Don said I was born in 1962, so I'm 60 years old, so I've got a good 10 years, and I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to do something much different but impactful here in Columbus.
What has surprised you about going from that aquarium environment, although we have an aquarium here, but what has surprised you, that transition from that kind of a facility to what you've got here now?
Yeah, well, I think the scale is obviously different, and I knew Columbus Zoo was a larger institution, had multiple venues, but I recall it was, I think, my first week or two on the job, I was signing a purchase order for fuel, for diesel fuel and propane, and it was a big purchase order. And so I asked Jen Ryan, our senior VP of operations, I said, so we're purchasing a lot of fuel. How many vehicles do we have here at all of our properties? And she said, well, I'm not sure exactly, Tom. And I said, well, can you give me a ballpark? She said, well, about 150. And so that kind of put it in perspective. I think back in Texas, we had a couple of pickup trucks, a van, and a forklift, and now it's sort of a small city. So I think the scale of the operation was a little humbling, but fortunately, I've got a great leadership team, very well seasoned professionals who are good at what they do, and so that certainly makes my job a lot easier.
We touched on Jack Hanna, and certainly he transformed the zoo, along with Jerry Bohr and Mel Dodge, the one who hired Jack Hanna. I don't know how familiar you are with Mel Dodge, but tell us about how you see Jack Hanna's legacy at the zoo.
So it's interesting. So if you think, I sort of look at the zoo maybe in epochs or eras, and the first probably 50 years, from 1927 when it opened till when Jack was hired in 1978, it grew modestly, but it had many of the challenges that a lot of municipal zoos had around the country. Limited funding, dated exhibits, and not a strong business plan. And so I think when Jack was hired, he understood that there was a need, but there was also there was a path forward. He understood the importance of zoos. He had been around animals his whole life, Central Florida, did other things. And so I think, he started really generating a lot of interest for the Columbus Zoo and really focusing on animals and conservation work. And as you said, really began to transform the zoo. And then when Jerry Bourne was brought in, I think those two really complemented each other. They worked well together. Jerry had a good background in municipal management. Jack was very comfortable in front of the camera, in front of the public. So they were a great sort of a yin and yang combination. And they developed some extraordinary habitats. They acquired a lot of land. We have 600 acres on our main site in Columbus, and then 10,000 in Muskingum County. To have that much land to work with, we've only developed, the zoo is probably developed outside of our monstrous parking lot. We probably have about 110 acres that we've developed. Golf course is about 150. So we still have a fair amount of land that we can expand to. And so that's a wonderful asset, and I give, again, Jerry Bourne a lot of credit for that. So well positioned. So I think Jack's legacy, first of all, creating an exceptional zoo, having amazing vision and passion. You talked about, Jack coming in and painting on the weekend, and he would bring his family in on Sunday, and they would pick up trash. And that, I think, inspires teams to work hard when they see the CEO picking up trash around the zoo. So I think that legacy lives, but for I think folks that maybe are outside of Columbus, he inspired so many people to care for the environment, to care for animals, and he inspired a lot of people to become zookeepers and zoo directors. And so I think that's his legacy.
I also know that we touched on the employees, and obviously there are all kinds of jobs at the zoo, but the people who are directly involved in animal care, what kind of training are you requiring of them, and how, their background, and how do you make sure that you are connecting people with animals who this is their life passion? Yeah.
So typically for a zookeeper or an aquarist at the zoo, a good starting point is a 4-year degree in biology. If they work in areas, for example, where we do a lot of operant conditioning, a lot of training, the elephants, for example, or in Adventure Cove where we have sea lions, some understanding of psychology, behavioral psychology, operant conditioning, those are all great skill sets to have. So they're well trained, and we typically, many of them have interned either at our zoo or at another zoo, and that's a great opportunity for them. So 4-year degree in college, and then usually a couple years interning, I think really prepares them well for the career. But I think really they learn so much on the job as well. We've got folks that have amassed so much experience caring for our animals that they become great mentors for these young staff coming in. So it's a lengthy process, but they're well qualified. In fact, a lot of our folks, they'll come to work for the zoo, they'll go out and work for another zoo maybe, and then many of them actually come back. But we've trained zookeepers that are now working in zoos all over the country.
The wilds is certainly a different environment than you get at the zoo.
Yeah.
Just for one thing, it's massive size. Yeah. Tell people what you like best about the wilds and what it offers that maybe you don't get in an urban zoo environment.
Yeah, so when I first came out here to interview, I actually spent about a half a day at the wild, sort of incognito, and it was remarkable. I'd always heard about it, but I'd never actually seen it, and seeing the pastures and seeing the habitat there, and really, in my mind, beginning to see the potential that we had for that facility. So as remarkable as the Columbus Zoo is, there are very few zoos in the world that have a 10,000-acre wildlife conservation center. So the St. Louis Zoo, one of the top zoos in the country, they're spending in excess of $100 million to create a 700-acre wildlife conservation center. And we've got a 10,000-acre wildlife conservation center. So it's a remarkable area where we can do restoration ecology, where we can have assurance populations of species. Scimitar horned oryx that are extinct in the wild live at the wilds now. Przalski's horses, another example. So these are populations that we will ultimately reintroduce into the wild to help restore these wild populations. So I think the ability to do research and conservation work there, the science that we do, but then bringing guests out to experience something that they can't really experience in a lot of other places. Most people probably will never do an African safari trip, but coming out to the wilds, they can actually have an experience that is very similar to what they would have in Africa right here in Central Ohio.
The zoos that are coming from around the country for that convention in September, you have to be ready to showcase with great pride some of what, the wilds, and what are you looking forward to showing off to them? And do they resent us that we have 10,000 acres?
Oh, I'd say they're maybe envious. I don't think they resent. I think they, our staff are really involved with other zoos around the country. So a lot of the animals that we have, many of the animals are managed as one group, one collection of animals. So if you think about Asian elephants in North American accredited zoos, there's about 100, 150. They're collectively managed as one population. The population just lives in 15 or 20 other zoos. So we're working with our colleagues. We have, a lot of our folks have leadership positions in some of the animal management programs. So we're excited just to welcome the colleagues back here to show them what we're doing. I think many of them have probably never seen Heart of Africa. The last time we hosted the conference was in 2002, I think. So a lot has changed since then. So we're excited for that. We're excited to get folks out at the wilds, but really just bringing folks to Columbus. I think as much as I'm excited to show off the zoo, I'm excited to show off this city. Columbus is an amazing city that probably people don't realize. I mean, we have one of the best science centers here. We've got this amazing Ohio History Center. We've got some of the best metro parks. I mean, there's really a lot of amazing assets that we have, and I'm excited to show those things off as well.
I know people who've gotten married at the zoo. It's a great place for a wedding venue, and you've got Zoombezi Bay right next door. Do you look at those types of things as marketing tools or as money generators? I mean, you get a certain percentage of your income from this levy, but you are trying to generate money in a lot of different ways, aren't you?
We are. We're trying to be very creative about that, and even more creative in the future. So you're right. I mean, Zoombezi Bay, it's a great experience for folks, families to come in and have some fun in the summer. But the primary purpose of Zoombezi Bay is to generate revenue to support the mission work of the zoo. I mean, that's why it exists. And so it does help from a marketing standpoint, but at the end of the day, we generate somewhere between $3 and $4 million of net income that supports the mission of the zoo. So, and the levy, you're right, the levy is a huge contribution to our operating expenses, but on a percentage basis, that's going down every year because our budget goes up every year, but the levy is fairly static. So whereas 20 or 30 years ago, it used to make up maybe a third of our operating budget, now it's less than 20%. So we continue to grow. We're about a $110 million operation if you look at all of our 4 parks. But one of our shifts that we want to do in the future, right now, I would sort of characterize the zoo in some respects as sort of a regional seasonal attraction. I mean, we're a wildlife conservation organization, but I think from the public's perspective, great place to visit in the summer, bring the family out. And that's wonderful. We want to continue to do that, but I think we have the opportunity to create more of a year-round national destination on our campus there. So that's really the thinking as we look long-term on that framework of the developments we'll bring in, the different aspects to really create that national destination here in Columbus.
I remember the last time that the zoo levy came up here in Franklin County. There were a lot of people who were pushing to maybe have a levy as well from Delaware County. The zoo sits in Delaware County.
Yeah.
So why not go to, you are a regional zoo, you sit in Delaware County, you get support from people come from all over to go to the zoo. Why just Franklin County taxpayers?
So my understanding is that according to the legislature, you can only get tax levy support from one county. So I think that probably would preclude Delaware County from doing a levy. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other ways that potentially we could look at getting support. In fact, as we start working on development on our campus, we're looking at different structures, TIFs or JEDs, to try to generate some additional income that would support our mission. So we're going to get creative about trying to determine what the best business plan is going forward, but certainly looking at all those different entities and districts to see what might make sense for us.
So break down your funding sources for us. If you get about 20% from Franklin County, where else is your money coming from?
Yeah, so certainly earned revenue is a big one. So admission, membership, that probably makes up maybe 25 to 30% of the budget. Our food and beverage and retail programs are pretty significant. Our event business, we've got a lot of great venues. That probably makes up another 15%. And then you include the levy with that, that's probably 85 to 90% of our operating budget. We do get some philanthropic support for general operations, but most of the money we raise, we really try to focus that on capital projects. So all those things support the zoo. And then again, it's the revenue that's coming from the water park primarily that helps make up that gap.
So describe to us how you would describe your management style.
Let's see. So I think back to, Tom Peters, author years ago, wrote a couple of great books, In Search of Excellence, and he talked about managing by walking around. He actually coined the term, and I think that I remember reading that book early in my career, and it made an impact on me. And as much as you've got work to do in your office, you've got spreadsheets, you've got all these things that you have to do, meetings all day long, but getting out, getting in front of the staff, getting in front of your guests, understanding what they're seeing and hearing and feeling on a daily basis has always been a priority for me. So I probably spend between a half an hour and an hour, at least, sometimes more, every day actually in the zoo. I go out to the wilds at least once a month, sometimes more. But just, again, managing by walking around, talking to staff, seeing what they're doing, understanding from our guests, what they like, what they don't like. I think it's that really informs me in many respects in the decision making that I make. And so I think that's always been something that I think has worked well for me. Trying to listen more than I speak, which is a challenge, but I know how vital that is. And then really trying to understand what are the strengths of all of our teams and making full use of their strengths, not having them work on things that maybe they're not really good at, trying to develop those strengths, and then letting them, giving them clear direction, but then letting them do their job, letting them do their work, I think has been important too. So it's kind of been a mix, but yeah, that's kind of a summary.
Well, you mentioned that when you got here, everything had fallen apart, as we know, on the management level, and that you were tapping into, you said there were 4 women who were had taken the helm.
Yeah.
How much are you relying on the institutional knowledge of the people who were here when you got here? I mean, how much strength have you drawn from the people who've been with the zoo? And I know people go there and stay there for their entire career because they love that institution.
Yeah.
How important was that for you?
Well, it was vital. I mean, the institution has a rich history and understanding of how it's been operated, both good and bad. Certainly over the last 15 to 20 years, I think has been vital. So that's been a huge part of my learning process, and same with visiting with board of directors. We have a number of board members who've served for a long period of time. They've been great sources of information about the zoo, about the community. So again, a lot of listening and a lot of learning, but by the same time, understanding and trying to get everyone to understand it is a new day at the zoo, and to some extent we do need to change the culture. And coming out of COVID and coming out of the challenges with the former leaders, there are things that have to change, and we have an opportunity to do that now. So I think understanding and respecting the legacy and the history, but also making everyone understand that we are going in a new direction. I think that balance has been interesting, but I think we've largely been able to accomplish it.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, if we were sitting here 5 years from now, what will you point at with greatest pride at the Columbus Zoo?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, certainly I'd love to be able to showcase new habitats that we've created, certainly new spaces for our animals that are spending the winter, new initiatives at the wilds. But I think what I would like to most importantly be proud of is if I could go back and say, because of the wildlife conservation work that we did, this is a species that now is thriving and that we've saved it from extinction, because ultimately that will be the measure of what we do. I mean, today we're a great zoo, we're a great family attraction. In the future, we will be a wildlife conservation organization that happens to run a great zoo and a conservation center and a water park and any number of different entities, because that's our North Star. I mean, at the end of the day, we're empowering people to save wildlife.
Well, we thank you for helping us save the Columbus Zoo. Tom Schmid, everybody. Any questions? CEO questions? And we always have a question from CEO Magazine. Do we have one this morning?
We absolutely do.
Thanks, Colleen. Tom, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You talked extensively about the conservation mission of the zoo and how important that is. I know the zoo just a couple of days ago celebrated the 3rd birthday of the cheetah cubs who were born via in vitro fertilization. Yeah. You've obviously had many high-profile animal births, both at the wilds and the zoo, from Biko and Frankie to the polar bears. Personally, the best emails I ever get are from Jen Fields with new baby animal announcements and pictures. Colleen, you probably agree. Can you talk about the importance of the zoo breeding programs beyond bringing people through the doors and how that helps your mission?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that nowadays people may not fully understand that almost every animal we have at the zoo was either born at that zoo or born at another zoo. And again, this is a collective process of managing these animals. And so what we learn through this breeding, first of all, it's great because that means we don't have to collect animals from the wild anymore, which that's how many zoos started decades ago, but that really is not needed anymore. So being able to understand the reproductive biology of these species, being able to breed these animals, and then being able to create both assurance populations as well as numbers of animals that can be released back out into the wild. As I mentioned on our Hellbender program, that's an enormously valuable project that we, along with all of our partners, are able to do. And so that has implications to understanding reproductive physiology of animals in the wild, successes, how we can help augment species that are at risk. I mean, there's so many things that we learn from caring for animals at a zoo that we can extrapolate to animals in the wild. There's a great story at the Mystic Aquarium where they were able to take petri dishes to their cetaceans, their beluga whales, and get next to the whale, take a petri dish, and actually be able to get a culture from the blowhole, the expiration from the blowhole of the mammal. That research now has extrapolated to scientists being able to do that out in the field. So for the first time now, that marine mammal researchers in the North Atlantic can culture bacteria from the lungs of a whale because of what people learned at aquariums. So those are the kind of breakthroughs that really are going to help save species from extinction.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. And Bill, I think you have, again, Tom Schmid, thank you for being with us. That was great.
All right, thank you, Tom, and as always, thank you, Colleen. I'm Bill Nolan, Columbus office managing partner of Barnes & Thornburg. We're a Midwestern-based national law firm and love being a sponsor for however many years of these programs. I think it's really a unique conversations and unique program. And whether it's someone who's been in Ohio for decades or someone like Tom who's here new or whatever kind of industry, I just feel like there's some common themes that always just come up in these Central Ohio leaders and the way sort of Tom responded to a lot of even more tough questions than usual from Colleen. Just with the sort of thoughtfulness and quiet confidence. Seems like a Columbus guy, even though he's relatively new here. So
we'll claim him anyway.
That's right. So thanks again, Tom and Colleen. So I do get to give away some coffee. These are gift cards from Crimson Coffee, so appreciate making these available. We have 10 of them. All look pretty manageable, but if I mess up your name, I apologize. Stephen Arnold from Lazier Capital, and by the way, you just picked these up on the way out. Kelly Vogel with Chris Vogel Design, Aaron Flatter from Garber Connect, Lori Miller from Inventory Pro, Stuart Bale from KeyBank, Sean Ramsey from Roto, Lindsay Squire from ServPro, Daniel Walton from Trinet, Nicole Lakin from One Columbus, and last but not least, Andrew Mullins from Lifeline of Ohio. So pick up your Crimson Cup coffee on the way out. Columbus Chamber is columbus.org. It's an incredible menu of things for businesses of all kinds that they offer. So check that out. Talk to your chamber people who are here. Drive safely. I think the zoo's open, I assume, right? All right. So thanks, everybody.